The US defense chief flies to Pakistan after threatening to punish Islamabad over terrorism. But in our exclusive interview, Pakistan's foreign minister tells us his country will no longer act as a US proxy. I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is Khawaja Muhammad Asif. US Secretary of Defense James Mattis flew to the Pakistani capital to discuss the White House's new strategy in Afghanistan. In it, Washington says financial aid could be withheld from Islamabad if the government there continues to support Taliban militants. The Pakistani government strongly denies the claim. But while the aim of Mattis's visit is to find what he called common ground, he may not find a receptive audience. I sat down with Pakistan's Foreign Minister Khawaja Asif, and in my exclusive interview, Asif says his country is tired of being treated like a US proxy. He then made a potentially explosive suggestion that his government's foreign policy might be inching away from the US and edging closer to Iran and China.
We're trying to get out of the 80s and the last decades, when our foreign policy was oriented towards the US interests in our region, way back in the 80s and after 9/11. We are trying to disengage ourselves with that role which we played in 2 to 3 decades, and have a more regionally oriented foreign policy, a foreign policy which serves our national interest, Pakistan's national interests, not someone far away from our region like United States of America. So our national interest is that is our primary concern, and that is where we stumbled over the last 3 decades, and we are now trying to weave our foreign policy around our own national interest. So we are in a transition, but we are almost there, inshallah.
So as you try to weave it, are you saying that the likes of China, with CPEC of course and beyond, and the likes of Iran, they are more of a priority than the United States?
Our region is more of a priority than the United States, because they are our neighbors, they are stakeholders. Whatever takes place in our region, they are directly affected. They benefit or they lose, whatever. That is, it's not like United States of America. They come, they do whatever they want to do. We play their proxies, and then whenever their interest is served, or whenever their objectives are achieved, they wash their hands off and go away. That won't happen again. That won't happen again, because that is not acceptable, one, and that doesn't serve my interest, the interest of my people, people of Pakistan. And Iran is our next door neighbor. We share centuries of history, culture, religion, to an extent language also. Afghanistan is our next door neighbor. Their peace is our peace. And China is a very, very trusted friend, trusted over 6-7 decades now. And they have huge investments in Pakistan, converting Pakistan into a corridor, China-Pakistan corridor to the Arabian Sea. Huge investments in power sector. We have strategic relationship. We have defense relationship, and then of course we have a relationship across the Gulf with Saudi Arabia, a historical friend. We have an emotional relationship with Saudi Arabia because of the 2 holy places over there, and of course we again have a defense relationship also with them, a strategic relationship also with them, and the Gulf states. So this is where we live, and this is where we should search for our foreign policy options, not somewhere far off. That is what we are doing now.
So you want to move away from the Americans. The Americans are not happy with Pakistan. Donald Trump putting you on notice, saying we're giving billions of dollars, yet you're funding the very terrorists that we are fighting. General Nicholson saying you're funding the Taliban, Haqqani network. General Mattis saying we're going to give Pakistan one last chance. Secretary of State Tillerson, maybe a bit softer, but also critical. They were all saying you fight one Taliban that attacks you, but support another that attacks Afghanistan and America. Even Afghanistan says that. Are they all wrong, or is there maybe some truth to it because you have to live in the region?
They are absolutely wrong. They are scapegoating us for the failures of last more than 15 years, maybe in 20 years, at least since 9/11. And they want a scapegoat for their failures, utter failures, complete failures. They have lost territory to Talibans, not because of us. They have record opium harvest, 9,000 tons this year. They have huge corruption in the government machinery. Their soldiers sell their arms to Taliban. They have Daesh in three provinces. This is not our doing. They accuse of backing us Haqqanis. Haqqanis don't need safe havens in Pakistan. They have almost 40% of territory, Afghan territory with them, the Talibans. Why should they come and have safe havens in Pakistan? That is something which is absolutely baseless. Perhaps some years back that was true to an extent, but since last now many years, since we pushed our Talibans out of our territory to North Waziristan, Americans wanted that, we wanted that. We pushed them out of Bajaur, Khyber, South Waziristan, Swat. We cleared our area at a huge cost, human cost. 200,000 of our soldiers are fighting these people on the Western Front. What are they doing across the border? Losing territory, having bumper opium crops. What are they doing? Where? You know, the last time Secretary Tillerson was there, the President Ashraf Ghani met him in Bagram. That tells you a lot. They met perhaps in a bunker. That tells you the whole situation of Afghanistan. But we would like to be part of the peace process in Afghanistan, in any bilateral or multilateral platform. I was in Baku just a few days back. But if the people in Kabul, they want to play a proxy of India, that is also not acceptable.
But why would they blame you for example, the June attack, where 90 Afghans were killed, 400 injured?
We had an attack. We had an attack yesterday.
But they said clearly, if you'd allow me to just finish, they said clearly the ISI orchestrated it, and the Haqqani network did it in Kabul at the behest of Pakistan. That was from the Afghan government. Why would they make that up?
You know, again, because of lack of control, lack of writ of the Kabul government in Afghanistan, they want to have a scapegoat, as I said, someone to blame. Like we had yesterday, day before yesterday, attack while we were having a conference in SCO conference in Sochi, and a Heart of Asia conference in Baku. And we had an attack, and people came from across the border, from Afghanistan. We have their phone numbers. We have given their phone numbers to Afghan government. They were in touch with their masters or their whoever was orchestrating that attack from Afghanistan. And actually, we had informed them that we are expecting something to happen on our territory, which is being planned and perhaps funded, financed from Afghanistan. So they already knew. There was a contact between two intelligence agencies, I would say, and they already knew, but they couldn't stop it. They have no control.
I see.
They have no control, and they just want. You know, let me put it. You talked of General Nicholson and General Mattis. and others who keep echoing the same blame game which you just narrated. Let me, they have all spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. Let me ask them a question. What did they do in Afghanistan? Why did they spend so many billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in Afghanistan?
That's a failure, of course.
Where are those billions?
Right.
That's there was a time when there were more than 100,000 U.S. soldiers over there.
Right.
Now they are down to 10,000, 12,000.
So they want to boost it a little bit.
What are their actual intentions?
They want
to
boost it. They want to boost it now, and they're sending a few thousand more.
No, that won't serve any purpose. It is basically a cover for something else they want to achieve in Afghanistan.
What do they want to achieve?
I don't know. I don't know, but at least whatever they are telling, that doesn't seem to be their purpose. That if that was the purpose, they could have achieved that purpose many years back.
Understood.
When they were in full force over there, when they had the momentum, they had that missionary sort of zeal also.
Right.
Immediately after they captured Afghanistan from the Talibans. But the time has passed. No,
but it's interesting, you say they had the missionary zeal, George Bush spoke of a crusade, that was all happening. Pervez Musharraf, perhaps you believe, made the wrong decision, right?
Yes.
But you
absolutely.
yourself have said that you tried to leverage these groups, or Pakistan tried to leverage these groups, because you didn't know what America was going to do, and you had to live in the neighborhood, whereas they could leave. You've said this just a few months ago, you used the word leverage with Haqqani Network, with Lashkar-e-Toiba. You've also said
I didn't name any group, but I did say that due to unreliability of Americans in the 80s and in the last decades, we had to have some sort of hedging done.
And that's geopolitics.
Yeah, just geopolitics.
But you used the word liabilities. You said Haqqani Network, Lashkar-e-Toiba, Hafiz Saeed, these types, they were liabilities. Now, I guess this is an opportunity to clarify it if you want to. When I read that, I think, well, on a balance sheet, you can have assets or liabilities, but it's still yours. It's your liability. If something is a liability, you own it. You control it. So were you admitting that you controlled them?
You write off the liabilities also, and you take losses for that.
So when did you write them off?
We are not backing them at all. This is a perception which was perhaps, as I said earlier, to an extent was correct some 5, 6, 7 years back.
But when did it end?
When we started our operation against them in June 2014,
I see.
We decided that enough is enough. These people have to leave our territory. So we made the disconnect with them. We disengaged with them. We went with full force. We went to after them, to push them away from our territory. This was a common goal. At least Americans told us that this is what they wanted. But we did it for ourselves, not for the Americans. But after we cleared them, and you've seen over the last 2 years or 3 years, there is a relative calm in Pakistan.
But that's why the Afghans are saying there's no calm in Afghanistan, so while you're fighting them here...
Because they have failed and we have succeeded.
Right, I see.
They have failed miserably, utterly failed, and we have succeeded. We have regained our territory back. They have lost more territory. So there's a huge difference. There's no comparison. We are fighting for ourselves. The people who are fighting over there, the foreign forces, they are fighting for something else. I don't know.
What do you think it is?
I don't know. You're an analyst. Why don't you analyze?
Something that's interesting about Pakistan is there's this constant claim that the real power is in the hands of the army. So, and this is interesting, I'm interested to hear this from you because you served as defense minister and foreign minister. No matter what you do as an elected civilian leader, ultimately, is it the ISI and the army chief that call the shots?
I don't agree with that, but people speculate or people try to conclude that. Because of our long history, almost 4 decades out of 7 decades of our independence, since 1947, we have been ruled by the military dictators. 4 military dictators, and in some cases during the intervals also there was influence coming from the military establishment, like I would say to an extent in the 90s, and but since 2008 we are gradually the control has come back to a large extent to Islamabad, to parliament, to judiciary, to executive, to the constitutional institutions. But as we were discussing now, that we have a tense border on the eastern side also, and on the western side also. We have more than 100,000 troops on line of control, and we have had I think there are in thousands the violation of LOC in last 1 year, and we are actively fighting the Talibans on our western border. We are putting up a fence over there, and to make our border secure. So the institution of army or institution of our defense forces is actively involved in defending the country, and they are actively involved in the process of determining our priorities. We have National Security Committee, where all the chiefs of armed forces are there. Defense minister is there, finance minister is there, foreign minister is there, and prime minister is in the chair. So we have this body which is actually evolving our foreign policy or decision on the defense. So you can say they have a constitutional role of consultation on major issues. They have their input, which is very valuable. At times it is crucial to decision making. So if it is interpreted with the background of our military dictatorships, so I think it is just because of that that this interpretation is done by Pakistani watchers. Otherwise, things have over the years since last 2 elections. I think we have traveled a lot on this road towards democracy. We have problems. I'm not saying that there are no problems. Democracy is still evolving. We have institutional problems also, but this happens when your constitutional institutions are paralyzed by military dictators for 10 years, 9 years, 6 years, 11 years. So after this paralysis, when you are coming out of that paralysis, you learn to walk, you learn to run, you learn to control. So we are almost out of it.
So you're crawling or walking now?
We are walking, almost running.
Final question. We've passed the 70-year anniversary of independence from the British partition with India. Ultimately, as somebody who's involved in crafting Pakistani foreign policy, is it still India-centric? Is India still chief enemy, chief competitor, and everything that needs to be done needs to be seen through the prism of what India is doing or what India might do?
I would rephrase what you have just said. Our defense is definitely India-centric. We have almost now since our independence, there is a threat. We have gone to wars with each other, and what is happening since last couple of years on the LOC, on working boundary, that supports this analysis that we have to have a defense policy or defense posture which is definitely India-centric. And India is creating troubles on our eastern border also, on our western border also. They have a lot of influence in Kabul. They have a very solid and huge presence in Afghanistan also. on international forums, on international platforms. Afghanistan sometimes, due to lack of a better word, acts as a proxy also of India in playing the role of. But let me emphasize that we want to deal with Afghanistan on a bilateral basis.
The Indians say you're obsessed with them.
We are not obsessed with them. Why should we be obsessed with them? We are an independent country, a nuclear state. Alhamdulillah, we are a very proud nation. We are not obsessed with them, not at all obsessed with them. But India is a danger to our security, and we must be vigilant about that. That is the only thing we have. That's the bedrock of our defense policy. Foreign policy, I would not say, because for foreign policy, I explained to you earlier what are our priorities and what are our goals. We are looking westward, but not far westward. It's close to our borders, or our western border, Iran in the north, Russian Federation, China, Afghanistan, Central Asian states, Gulf states, Saudi Arabia. We would like to have good relationship with the Indians, but I don't think there is a chance of any improvement of relationship with the present religious extremist government in Delhi.
You think they're religious extremists? Modi's government's a religious
government, what they did in Gujarat when Modi was the chief minister, he massacred over 2,000 Muslims over there. He's massacring Muslims in Kashmir also. So there is actually a genocide and ethnic cleansing of Muslims going on.
But you believe the BJP is a religious extremist movement?
It's religious extremist movement. Absolutely. Absolutely, because they think this is the easiest way of whipping up the frenzy and to maximize voter support. It's sad, that after 70 years they have to resort to these crude tactics of vote getting. They have to target the minorities in India, Muslims, Christians, this caste system they have, which is actually a negation of humanity. The caste system itself is a negation of humanity, which negates the basic human values.
But I mean, they could say, you look at Islamabad and you had this group of offshoot Barelvis who brought the state to its knees.
Let me explain that.
You can say, Pakistan, you have your problems.
We have problems.
We have our problems.
We have problems. We have problems. We have problems. I'm not denying that. But let me explain that. This is the legacy, or this is the carryover of when the whole world got together and religiously radicalized our society in the 80s. Because they wanted us to fight with Soviet Union. So we are dealing with that mess which was left over, that debris which was left on our soil by Americans and their allies. And then they again came back after 9/11. And these two huge tragedies, these two huge follies on our part, as far as our foreign policy is concerned, our preferences were concerned, huge follies. This is the debris of those misfortunes, which I'm not blaming anybody. I'm blaming the rulers when this thing happened in the 80s and after 9/11. So we are dealing with that. This religious radicalization of Pakistan society is a direct outcome of the Afghan war, when they wanted us to fight against Soviet Union, and then they wanted us to be again their proxy after 9/11. It is our mistake. They used us. Now we are dealing with that radicalization, trying to clear off, trying to come back to, as I said earlier, that it's a paralysis. We are trying to come out of that paralysis, and that paralysis is slowly, gradually. We are walking. We are trying to run. We are trying to find our feet, to stand on our feet, And alhamdulillah, we are doing well. We have high hopes.
And when you're sprinting, I hope you'll call us up and do another interview with us on the Newsmakers.
Sure, anytime.
Khawaja Mohammed Asif, Foreign Minister of Pakistan, it's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still ahead on the Newsmakers, we go to the Ivory Coast, where migrants from there end up in Libya as slaves. And Russian investigators resurrect an old conspiracy theory about who killed Tsar Nicholas II. It's been criticized as anti-Semitic. Welcome back to the Newsmakers. Video of slave auctions in Libya have spread like wildfire across the internet. The recordings are chilling and reveal a new low for human rights in the country's post-Gaddafi reality. In a moment, our panel will debate who's responsible. But first, we wanted to find out more about the victims who set out as poor migrants trying to reach Europe and end up under the hammer. So we sent the Newsmakers Randolph Nogel to the Ivory Coast to hear their stories. Here's his report.
The soft strains of Sunday Mass ring out from the Basilica of Our Lady Peace. But Father Frank Ulleton is using his sermon to address a grave issue in Ivory Coast: migration. Many of the country's youth are discouraged by a lack of opportunities at home, and they're setting out for a better life in Europe.
It feels that now the world is kind of an open village where what is done in other part of the country of the world is seen, and this is really appealing to young people.
But the sobering reality is that many who take the long, dangerous journey end up trapped in Libya. Yusuf, Issa, and Loseni are among the few who managed to escape. They met in prison after they were captured by Libyan rebels. The boys are all under the age of 18, which is why we've decided not to show their faces.
Petit cellules pour au moins à 60 personnes à l'intérieur.
En prison, c'était très difficile. En prison, c'était très difficile. On ne se lavait pas, on ne mangeait pas. On donnait un peu par jour. Bon, c'était très difficile en prison. Et on nous frappait souvent aussi.
Ivory Coast worked with the International Organization for Migration to bring the boys home just a few days before we met them.
Il faut dire que dans ces prisons-là,
these young people were placed in situations where they suffered treatment that was inhuman. These children were hoping for something good, something positive, a dream that they had in leaving Ivory Coast. This dream was shattered.
Outside the Africa-EU summit in Abidjan, these activists are putting the issue of migration front and center.
In the 1960s, Ivorians were not fleeing. I asked myself what happened. Now we are trying to leave. It means that the politicians have more or less failed.
Thousands of people have died this year trying to cross the Mediterranean from Libya to Italy. The EU responded with a deal to help the Libyan Coast Guard return refugees and migrants trying to cross, something the UN has called inhumane. That criticism strengthened by recent footage on CNN showing migrants in Libya being bought and sold as slaves.
Slavery has no place in our world, and these actions are among the most egregious abuses of human rights and may amount to crimes against humanity.
Now there's a new plan to evacuate and send home as many as 17,000 migrants being held in Libya. But the main purpose of the summit in Abidjan is to address the root causes of why people leave Africa.
60% of the population in Africa is under 30 years old. And this movement, this impatience for change, real change now, is starkly illustrated by this movement and the suffering, the harrowing scenes that we've seen.
We have to invest more in Africa. That's why we will use 44 billion in foreign investment funds to assist our African friends in their countries.
Perhaps one of the most significant ways to reduce migration is a so-called Marshall Plan for Africa, a reference to US assistance for Western Europe after World War II. The goal is to help African economies develop, build infrastructure, and most importantly, provide jobs.
On paper, Ivory Coast is a success story. Its economic growth is among the highest in Africa. But some say the country's youth are leaving because the benefits of that growth aren't trickling down to those who need it most.
Nearly 1 in 2 people in Ivory Coast live in poverty. Conditions in rural areas are even worse.
If people were fleeing this country where we are heading to, there won't be any development. Nobody is going to, who is going to develop our countries for us? Who?
Like many countries in Africa, Ivory Coast has a rapidly growing youth population. The challenge will be to entice them to stay. Randolph Nokel, The Newsmakers in Abidjan.
Well, joining me now in Geneva is UNHCR spokesman William Spindler, and from Tripoli is Mohammed Al-Jarrah. He's the founder and CEO of the consultancy firm Libya Outlook. Gentlemen, good to have you on the Newsmakers. Let me start with you, William. It's something that had been spoken about for years, but I think, you know, part of the outrage around the world is that we actually have empirical evidence. We have video evidence of slave markets in Libya. Who can we blame for this, William?
Well, this is a very difficult situation that has been touching refugees and migrants in Libya for many years. We have heard reports of people raped, of people abused, kept in terrible conditions by smugglers, and now there's evidence of people being sold as cattle. This is outrageous, this is terrible, and we need to find ways to avoid this from happening. It's not a question of whose fault it is. It's clearly the fault is of those who are committing these appalling crimes. The question is how to deal with it, how to avoid this from happening.
Okay, so Mohammed, there are buyers and there are sellers. That's one level of criminality. Behind that is a context of a failed state and multiple actors involved in that over multiple years. If you had to pinpoint one particular protagonist in this story that's most responsible, who would that be, Mohammed?
It would be the transnational criminal human trafficking networks who have built a business model that has grown to become a multi-million, maybe even billion-dollar trade. They are working in sub-Saharan African countries. They are actually advertising these services, and they are also working in Libya, but the network extends to even European countries. But to give you some context, Libya has become a failed state since 2011. There is no representative, legitimate government in the country that has monopoly over the use of force or controlled territory in the country. There is an internationally recognized government here in Tripoli, but that government cannot even protect itself at times. And what's also interesting here is the fact that Europe's policy to deal with the migration has been to contract Libyan armed groups, Libyan militias that are implicated in these human rights abuses. And basically the memorandum of understanding that was signed last year, despite the protests from Libyan diplomats in Brussels, but also Libyan legal experts and Libyan activists, that this deal should not go ahead, and it was challenged in Libyan courts. Despite that, the Italian government, bankrolled by the European Commission, went ahead with this deal, and what we see is that migrants are being intercepted, returned back to Libya to appalling conditions, and I think the European countries or the European Union is clearly complicit in all of this.
Yeah, you don't get more of an indictment of a deal than slaves being sold in a market. Let's have a little listen to what Libya's ambassador to Cameroon, Mohamed Khatouni, had to say in response to these astounding revelations. Let's have a little listen.
Yes, it exists, but it's happening in the conflict zones where the Libyan government has no control. It's on the side of the border between Libya, Niger, and Chad. It's in an area where there's trouble. Anything goes there, even slavery, because it's a conflict zone.
Okay, so that's one explanation for it. Let's also have a little listen to. I'll read you out what Libyan acting ambassador to the UN, Al-Mahdi Al-Majerbi, had to say about this. He said, Libya is the victim of a large-scale false media campaign of defamation to portray it as a racist country. William, it sounds as if it's a government in denial. Mohammed saying There isn't even a functioning government. You guys have to deal with the internationally recognized government. And against these allegations, their best response is to say, well, we're not racist, and it's not quite happening in the places you're saying it's happening. What does that tell us about the situation on the ground, William?
The situation on the ground is extremely difficult, and organizations such as UNHCR and others who are trying to improve conditions there face huge challenges. Let's not underestimate the difficulties of working in a country, as has been described, where there is no overall control of the territory by the government, where there are militias, where there are criminal gangs operating, where there are competing political structures. The security issue is very, very serious. We have difficulties in working normally in Libya. So what we are saying is we will continue to try to improve conditions in Libya, but let's not underestimate the challenges. In our view, what needs to be done to address this situation is to offer alternatives to refugees and migrants before they come to Libya. By the time they have arrived in Libya, many of them have already undergone huge dangers, crossing the Sahara Desert, often falling into the hands of these criminal gangs. So let's find ways so that they can find protection for refugees and better opportunities for economic migrants before they have to move on. And also, let's also be clear about this. We also need to find legal ways for people to find safety, for refugees, for the most vulnerable refugees, to find safety in Europe and other parts of the world through legal ways.
Right. Mohammed, as an immediate emergency solution, the AU and the EU have been meeting. The IOM is involved, and they're saying by the end of the year, they hope to have 15,000 of these refugees and migrants airlifted out of Libya back to their home countries. Yes, it's short term. It doesn't, deal with the root causes, but is it a good solution, Mohammed?
We're talking about hundreds of thousands of African migrants in Libya. So that number is a very small number. And I think this new plan is to target those that are at high risk. And that's welcome. It's important that action is taken. But it's very important. I mean, that the level of hypocrisy from African leaders and also European leaders after the CNN video emerged is astounding. African leaders need to do more at home to make sure that they break these criminal networks at home that are actually marketing their services in these countries. And also European leaders need to do more at receiving those that are vulnerable, need to do more at meeting their international obligations and not violate international law by intercepting migrants who have reached international waters and returning them to a dangerous zone that is Libya. And also there has to be a lot more effort in actually stabilizing Libya and making sure that we do have a political settlement in Libya and a government that's representative and a government that is able to deal with the world, to handle issues with regards to terrorism, to migration, to a whole range of issues. And also we need to remember that Libya before 2011 was a big market for African migrants. They find jobs and they are able to work in Libya. But Libya now, there are 1.2 million Libyans in urgent need of humanitarian assistance out of the 5.2 millions. So Libya as a country is actually falling apart. Making a deal with an internationally recognized government that cannot provide for its own citizens and cannot protect its own self is laughable, is a joke, and is something that Europe and Italy in particular have to be held accountable for making such deals and dealing with militias, sometimes that are complicit in committing these human rights violations and crimes against migrants who are trying to find a better life for themselves.
William, clearly what has been tried over the past few years has failed because it has culminated in a failed state and slaves in markets in the year 2017. Some are coming up with some creative solutions. They're saying governments have failed. They're saying international organizations have failed. Why not be a little different and maybe bring in private mercenary armies? Blackwater founder Eric Prince saying we will detain, intercept, repatriate these migrants at a fraction of the cost When you hear stuff like that, are you open to it, or does it make you fearful?
The responsibility of protecting people, whether they are citizens or migrants or refugees, rests with governments. The problem, as we have heard, is that there is no government in Libya that is capable of functioning as such. So we need to stabilize the country. We need to provide for rule of law and order inside the country. And to try to simply keep the problem in Libya away from Europe and hope that people will stay there without addressing the root causes why people are moving, why people are going to Libya and wanting to come to Europe in the first place. It's immoral, and it's in the long term destined to failing. We need to address the root causes why people are moving. We need to create the conditions inside Libya for this for people to find a minimum of protection, but that is going to take a long time. In the meantime, we need to continue providing alternatives so that people can travel safely through resettlement, through family reunification, and so on. Otherwise, we will still be dealing with this situation in years to come.
Mohammed, ultimately, do Haftar and Sarraj need to sit down and form some sort of unity government for anything to start? Because the backdrop to all of this is political uncertainty and two rival governments who both say, no, I'm in charge. Is that what needs to happen, Mohammed?
Yeah, it is actually political vacuum and institutional vacuum in Libya. There is lack of governance on the ground, and indeed, there has to be, currently there is de facto partition of the country, i.e. there are two different authorities that are operating in the country, one in the east and one in the west. So for any progress to be made, pressure from the international community and solutions from the international community to bring these Libyan factions together is quite important. Instead of individual countries supporting each this side or the other in the ongoing Libyan conflict or the ongoing Libyan crisis, these countries need to put their collective effort into actually pushing their proxies or pushing the actors that they deal with on the ground into finding a settlement that would result in a unified government. And it's important to comment on the question of black waters and whether they are a good solution to this. Libya has enough militias on the ground. Adding just another armed group to try and do a job is not going to be the solution. And commercializing the issue here is only going to backfire a big time.
Yeah, it's an embarrassing situation in Libya at the moment. There was so much euphoria when Gaddafi was ousted, so much hope for this country amidst the Arab Spring, and a horrendous situation for hundreds of thousands of people at the moment, Libyan citizens and foreigners passing through trying to make it to Europe. Terrible situation. We hope to have a discussion about Libya when it sees better days. But for the moment, I must thank you, William Spindler and Mohammed Al-Jarrah. Thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Russia's intelligence agency has opened a case into whether Tsar Nicholas II and his family died in what's being called a ritual killing. The old conspiracy theory goes that during the Bolshevik Revolution, there was a Jewish plot to have the ruling family murdered. Academics have long concluded there's little proof to support the allegations, which Jewish leaders have condemned as anti-Semitic. So why are Russian investigators giving them a second thought? Kim Vanel begins the conversation with this report.
Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Tsarina Alexandra and their 5 children were killed by a Bolshevik firing squad in a basement on July the 17th, 1918. For 100 years, their story has plagued Russia, which canonized the family in 2000.
For us, Nicholas II is a martyr symbolizing the entire Christian history of the Russian people and encompassing all Russia's grief, glory and greatness.
But for others, the story is not so straightforward. Father Tikhon Shevkunov recently reigniting the conspiracy theory that the Romanovs' execution was part of a Jewish plot, claiming Jews saw the killings as a special ritual of revenge. Jewish groups are outraged, noting the story of Jews extracting blood to make bread is a myth used in anti-Semitic propaganda for years.
But the ritual murder of the Tsars family, this myth is surely 100% anti-Jewish. So we were pretty shocked when we heard that.
Both the Russian Orthodox Church and Russia's top investigative agency now plan to look into the Jewish plot theory. Further evidence for some of an anti-Semitic undercurrent, which Jewish groups want addressed by President Vladimir Putin himself.
They have to clarify the matter. It cannot be silenced.
Jewish groups fear support for the theory at the highest levels of church and state could fuel widespread overt anti-Semitism, especially in the lead up to July 2018, 100 years since the Tsar and his family were killed.
Well, joining me now from Champaign, Illinois, is Eugenia Bruton. He's the author of several books on Tsarist Russia and ritual murder, and is an associate professor of modern European Jewish history at the University of Illinois. Eugene, good to have you on the program. I mean, this is quite extraordinary, 100 years on. It's strange, it's odd that the Orthodox Church is pushing for this. It's odd that the state is giving them the resources to investigate this. Why are they doing it?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. And I mean, this obviously has to do with the events that transpired last week in Moscow. So on November 27th, the Federal Investigative Committee announced that it would look into the claim that the execution of Tsar Nicholas II and his family in July 1918 was a ritual killing. A commission of the Russian Orthodox Church had worked on the case since, as I understand it, since 2015, when a Russian court reopened an investigation into the murder of the Romanov family. And Bishop Tikhon, who's an influential figure with very close ties to Vladimir Putin, told the TASS news agency that we strongly favor the view that it was a ritual murder. And for a significant part of the Church Commission, Tikhon argued, there is no doubt that is what happened. Now, these are stunning allegations, and they come from a very influential figure who also happens to be Vladimir Putin's confessor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so when they're saying ritual murder, is it a wolf whistle for anti-Semitic blood libel? Do they really just clearly mean the Jews did it?
Well, when there's an absolute association between what is called ritual killing and ritual murder, or the blood libel. So this theory that Jews kill Christians to collect blood for a ritual rite, first of all, it's a complete fabrication. No credible evidence has ever been produced to substantiate the charge. The accusation itself originated in England in the 12th century and became widespread in early modern Germany and Poland. Furthermore, Russia has had a long history of promoting the accusation for almost 250 years. And in two of the most famous cases, Velish in 1823 and baseless in 1911, all the Jews charged were absolutely acquitted.
Right. And I understand that the protocols of the Elders of Zion, it was most likely to have been pushed out of Tsarist Russia in 1903 or thereabouts. So that's one thing. On the other hand, if I look at the situation of blood libel, and I look at how a lot of Nazis, a lot of the far right call Bolshevism or call socialism or communism basically a Jewish plot. That has happened over many, many years. I've actually met Nazis who say, oh no, this is all a Jewish plot. Tell me how this reconciles with the country that helped defeat the Nazis. Why is this now a thing in Russia, the country that is the successor to the Soviet Union?
Well, by definition, conspiracy theories contradict facts, and their conspiracy theories work because they're malleable, because they're used as a tool to explain reality. And two of the most significant, so most powerful conspiracy theories, one is the blood libel, and two is the protocols of the Elders of Zion that you just mentioned. So conspiracy theories are used to explain certain kinds of reality, to abuse certain kinds of reality, and to contradict facts. And so conspiracy theories are believed both on the left and on the right. And people use this kind of stuff for political gain.
Right. Now, obviously there's some rewriting of history taking place here. Bishop Tikhon is trying to rewrite history, and those who support him and support this campaign are trying to rewrite history. And generally, when people try to rewrite history, they're trying to reconcile embarrassing things or contradictory things. What is the bishop trying to reconcile? What are those who support this move, this investigation? What are they trying to reconcile and make right in trying to explain Russian history?
Well, they are obviously pushing a certain kind of, they're pushing out minorities. They're pushing out, even the Jewish community. The Jewish community in Russia right now is extremely small in comparison to what it was before the collapse of the Soviet Union, but it continues to endure its fair share of anti-Semitic attacks. And what Bishop Tikhon probably is trying to do is try to push for a more, united, what they call united Russia, right? That Russia is for ethnic Russians, and the blood libel is used as a tool to promote this kind of worldview in many respects.
Yeah, well, they're trying to say it wasn't the Bolsheviks, it might have been the Jews. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when they reopen it. It's going to be next summer, 2018, when I guess we'll hear the results. Fascinating times in Russia right now. Eugene,
right.
Yes? Go ahead.
I would be very curious to learn of the evidence that the Federal Investigative Commissions comes up to substantiate such an absurd, dangerous charge.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's a panel of experts comprising reps from the Russian Academy of Sciences, Moscow University, St. Petersburg University, and of course the Orthodox Church. They're all involved, which is why this is so mind-blowing. Eugene, I'm out of time, but it's been really good to talk to you. We'll be watching and following the story closely. Eugenia Bruton, thank you very much for joining us. And that's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, a Houthi rebel attack kills former Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh. What will this mean for the future of the conflict? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.